So since I started my group program helping ELT freelancers set up or develop their own businesses, I've worked with quite a number of teacher trainers. They're usually working largely for other institutions, such as publishers or on CELTA or Trinity teacher training courses. And to be completely honest, they're usually working an enormous number of hours for ever decreasing pay. And I can see you smiling, Sandy.
Yep, that's true.
But the going rate for CELTA tutoring is not much more than it was when I started 20 years ago.
Nope.
So, people often say to me, is there an alternative? Is there a market out there? And I would say that absolutely is, because teacher trainers have incredible skills which they can use either within ELT or outside ELT. So I'm going to be talking to Sandy, who is a great example of someone who used her skills and her initiative to discover a great niche and offer something that no one else was offering. And I should say that Sandy's not one of my group program alumni. This was all her. But she is now working. Is now working with me as an associate coach on my group program, and she's going to be helping out particularly with like technical challenges that people often encounter. So, Sandy, let's start off then by you telling us a bit about yourself and your background, and for those who don't know you.
Yeah, so I started teaching English nearly 20 years ago now, which is a little bit scary. And when I first started, I was working in private language schools, and I did a CELTA course to get me started. And then I knew that the next thing that I needed to do was Delta. That was what I heard everybody talking about. So 10 years ago, I did my Delta course part-time, and I did it while I was working. And then off the back of that, I became a CELTA trainer. I became a director of studies. I was managing a school in Poland for 6 years. And I then 2 years ago, I went freelance and started running my own teacher training courses and doing various other things. As a kind of parallel to that, in 2010, when I was in my third year as a teacher, I started a blog, which if people have heard of me, that's normally where they've heard of me. And I was just blogging about the teaching that I was doing, things that I was doing in the classroom. I then started blogging about my experience while I was doing my Delta, my experience becoming a CELTA trainer, my experience becoming a director of studies, like what I was learning in the process. And I also started having guest posts on there. One series of which is Delta Conversations, because when I started doing my Delta, I didn't realize that there were lots of different ways to do Delta. So I've tried to show people that there are many different ways to approach doing your Cambridge Delta exam, basically. So I've kind of got these two strands, like my training, my management, my own professional development, but then building up what's been on my blog and trying to make that useful to teachers, but also it shows my own development. Like when I look back to posts that I wrote in 2010, occasionally I read them and think, did I really think that? Or did I really do that in the classroom? But it's really interesting, that process. So, yeah.
Yes, and I think, that's how I first kind of got to know you, was through that whole sort of blogging world.
Yes.
If you like. There was a lot going on at that point. And it is still it remains, I think. I mean, it's not as popular as it was, but it still remains a great way of getting your name out there.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, maybe that's a conversation for another live, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I do think that is definitely something that still works. So you mentioned, developing your own teacher training courses, and obviously you can tell me if there's other courses that you want to talk about as well, but I was thinking particularly about the Take Your Time Delta program, because that really caught my eye when you launched that a little while back now. So how did you, what is it and how did you get the idea, basically?
Yeah, so when I did my Delta exam, my Delta qualification, I did the whole thing in a year when I first signed up to do it. And I was working full time. So I was working like 30, 35 hours a week. And then I was spending at least 10, sometimes 15, 16 hours a week in addition on my Delta. And I was trying to do all of the all three modules at the same time. So if you don't know about Delta, if you're watching, there are three parts to it. So module 1, you're working towards an exam, you're learning theory, methodology. Module 2 is teaching practice, and you teach a series of lessons and you're observed and you get feedback on that. And then module 3 is an extended assignment. If you do the specialism one, you're putting together a course plan. So you're doing needs analysis, diagnostic testing, working out how to assess people, basically. And all of that was new to me. Like, everything was new to me. And I found it so incredibly stressful that I triggered a genetic illness that I've got for the rest of my life. It was a horrible experience for me. And I really found that doing Delta was interesting, but I didn't have the mental space to be interested in it sometimes. And I did it from September to June. I actually ended up being off work for the whole of December because I was exhausted and I was ill. And that whole experience just made me so stressed. But then after I did my Delta, once I'd kind of had some distance and had some time to reflect on it, I realized how useful it had been to me. So becoming a CELTA trainer, it meant that I was able to explain what I was doing in the classroom. It meant that I was able to convey that to other people. When I was managing people, when I was observing them, when I was putting together workshops, like the grounding of the methodology that I'd learned from Delta, the way that I'd improved my own teaching, all of that meant that I was a better manager, I was a better trainer, and I was a better teacher. So I could see that there was a huge amount of value in Delta, but I knew that the way that I did it wasn't a good, healthy way to do it. And so then when I knew that I was going freelance, I was thinking about, okay, what can I sell, basically? What is my product? What can I offer to teachers? And I thought, the most useful thing that I think I can do is help people to work towards the Delta Module 1 exam, but not in this super rushed, crazy fast, short period of time. So most of the courses that exist are 12 weeks or less. My course is 9 months. So it's like 3 times as long. But also many of the courses, when you're working towards it online, you're working in forums, you're very isolated, you're very separate from anybody else. And that was one of the things that I found stressful about Delta, was I felt like I was the only person having these problems. I felt like I was the only person dealing with this. There were loads of people in the course, but nobody was interacting. So I thought, okay, rather than forums, live sessions. And I think the pandemic, teaching on Zoom, was kind of an eye-opener for me, because it made me realize that we can have these sessions, we can have these meetings of teachers internationally. And I think that really, it opened the market, because teachers realized that they could do that as well. But it gave me that idea of, what about combining these live sessions, doing it for longer, making it less stressful overall. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go. I'll see what happens. I'll set up a course and I'll see if it works. And it has. And after I'd run the module 1 a couple of times, I thought, oh, maybe I can have a go with module 3. Let's see what happens there. And I'd got a merit in my own module 3. But I definitely, when I set up both courses, I was letting people know initially, this is the first time that I'm running this course. I'm learning along with you. So give me feedback, let me know what's working. But I want to give you support, so that you don't feel isolated, so you don't feel separate, so you don't feel alone while you're doing it. And I want to give you that person to be accountable to as well, because I think when you're self-studying, one of the things you're missing is somebody to say, well, have you done this yet? When are you going to do it? Here's your deadline. Having that external person to do that with. And then, so I was doing the specialism, and then I realized that nobody particularly runs management courses. for the module 3 for Delta. So I am absolutely fascinated by management, by business. And so I thought that would be a really interesting thing for me to do as well. So kind of I've gradually added to the suite of courses over time. With module 1, a couple of years later, I started with module 3, and then I started, or a couple of courses later, and then I started with module 3 management. And so kind of gradually growing my offer as well. And then word of mouth has grown as well. So I'm starting to get more people applying now, for example. So that's where the idea came from, but also then grown.
Well, I think, I mean, that's, you know, that's fascinating. And I knew some of it, but just kind of hearing the whole story, because I think, you know, it's the whole setup. I mean, I used to work on Delta courses and they were always 12 weeks long. And it makes sense from an institutional point of view, because you hire the tutors for a short period of time. It's, you know, much more cost effective. But from the perspective of the people doing it, it was a total nightmare. And you know, and these, including me, you know, as a tutor, and these people are generally young and they have no ties, no family, nothing else to do but go away and work at the weekends and evenings, you know, so that's bad enough. But imagine if on top of that you also do have a family or whatever. I mean, you know, so all those people are not being served. And the big institutions are not interested, you know, so it's
I was actually genuinely very surprised that nobody had thought about it, because there's nothing in the Cambridge Handbook that says that the course can't be longer. So the one person who was running a course that was slightly similar was Sue Swift. She was running a long-term course, but it was still a different model. It didn't have these live sessions every week. You could kind of roll on and off to it at different times. And so I think the more that I've done the course as well, the more I've realized that there's this huge perception around Delta that it needs to be survived. And I don't think that that's the right way to think about our professional development. It shouldn't be a trial that we have to fight our way through in order to emerge victorious at the other side. It should be an enjoyable experience. It should be something that we are happy to do, that we look forward to coming to the sessions, not just, oh God, I've got Delta again. And I think that's really what I've been trying to do, is like make it a human course that starts with the people who are doing it, rather than starting with those institutional requirements. And that's where I'm lucky, because I'm a freelancer. I can do that. I can set up my timetable around the courses rather than setting up the courses around the timetable and the availability.
No, absolutely. And, you know, this is one of the things, I mean, not just with teacher trainers, you know, with teachers as well, but the fact that we are just us actually gives you an awful lot of flexibility. And you can find, you know, there are going to be lots and lots of people who want to do it your way, I would say. But you don't need the enormous numbers that a big institution might need in order to have a very viable business. And, you know, and I think that's what it's about, really, is about finding those niches of where there's a group of people who are not currently being served, or, you know, they just want something slightly different for whatever reason. You know, it doesn't have to be a whole new idea that nobody's ever thought of.
And I think
filling it.
I think that's it, as you say, is finding. That was the idea as well, that I started small. I started with a single course and I thought about what is it that's missing, but I still have my other work around it. So it's not that I've completely stopped my other work and then I've started doing this entirely and that I have to cover all of my costs with it. I've kind of started doing it gradually and then it's grown. And as it's growing, I'm now thinking, okay, well, now I can drop this. I can afford to drop this because I've got the momentum behind some of my business, and I can start to invest some money in it now. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing as well, which I think is really important.
Totally agree. Yes, it makes much more sense. And also, you know, people do sometimes come to me and they have plowed, you know, maybe a year of their life into creating a course, and they haven't actually tested whether anybody wants it.
Yes.
And it is a bit like, oh dear, how am I going to say this to them, you know, and I think by starting, I mean, what you were talking about, you know, saying to people, I'm just trying this out. You know, I'm learning with you. I want feedback. Probably you're doing it at a lower price, you know, to reflect that. Really takes a lot of the pressure off, and it teaches you what people actually want and need rather than what you think they want and need, you know. So I would always recommend that.
That's exactly how I started. So I'm on my 6th cohort now. I'm running my 5th cohort, and I'm recruiting for my 6th cohort. So the first cohort was cheaper, and then I put the price up for the 2nd cohort, because then I was like, okay, I know what this course is now. But I completely rewrote it between the 1st and the 2nd cohort, and then I completely rewrote it between the 3rd and the 4th cohort. And probably it's going to get fairly rewritten between the 5th and the 6th cohort. So some things remain from the very first time that I ran it, but each time I do it, it's evolving, and I think it's becoming a better course each time. But this is the agile mindset, I suppose, is I'm putting something out there and saying it's not finished. And hopefully it probably will never be finished, because if it is finished, where's the interest in it for me as well? I've got to stay interested in it too. It can always get better. The course can always be improved. But right now, this is the best that I can do for you. And I'm telling people that when I interview them as well. So the course will keep changing, it will keep improving. This is what I've changed between last time and this time, because then I think they can see that I'm practicing what I preach as well. If I'm saying to them, you know, keep evolving as a teacher, then I need to be evolving as a trainer. My courses need to be evolving. It's not a static, like, finished thing that is always going to be there. It's going to develop as I learn more about what people need and who the people are who are doing the courses.
Yeah, no, I mean, I relate to that so much. I mean, in terms of, you know, my group program, that's exactly the same process. And I have done, you know, bigger bits of rewriting, but I've never run it again without there being some changes.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that, you know, I think that's a good thing, obviously. And also it does kind of, I think you're right about sort of, you know, practicing what you preach, but also with business, I think you can't create a business and like, that's it. That's how my business is going to run. You know, you have to be constantly looking and thinking, is that still working? Could it work better? And you have to kind of see that as part of the fun.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, rather than a pain.
I think that's the thing that I love about it, is that I'm never bored. There's always something. I mean, occasionally I do feel a bit overwhelmed when I'm like, oh, but there's all these things that I want to do and I have no time to do it. So it's like being able to prioritize what it is that I want to do next with the business. So I have lots of ideas for how I want to keep developing it, but working out, okay, what's my next like minimum change that I need to make so that the next course runs a bit better, or so that, you know, or is it a sensible thing for me to add a whole extra new course right now, or should I just wait a bit until these courses have settled and then I can add a new one? Or like thinking for my mental health, apart from anything else, like part of the reason that I want to be a freelancer is so that I can manage my time, so that I can manage my workload. And so there's no point putting unnecessary expectations on myself about, okay, it's another year and therefore there must be another course, you know. But I can go, okay, I've got this idea for a course in the future. When I'm ready, when these things have settled, when I'm kind of happy enough with them, because they're never going to be perfect, okay, I'm starting to get a little bit bored, maybe it's time to add this extra course in there for the interest for me. Maybe it's time to start bringing in other trainers. Maybe it's time to do this, to then grow it if you want to. But I mean, there's no obligation to grow it either. I'm growing it because I've got lots of ideas for how to grow it, but I would be quite happy to like keeping it the same set of courses, but having a couple more groups, or, you know, there's different directions that I can go in depending on what the demand is, basically, as well.
Yeah, and you know, what suits you as a business owner, because we hear a lot about all of this, you know, 6 figures every month kind of, thing. And that's not what everybody wants.
No.
Some people want to grow a business in order to do less work.
Yes.
And they don't care. They're already kind of earning enough and they're happy just to stay there. And so they want to optimize their business so they can keep earning the same amount but do fewer hours. And that's still a win. Absolutely. Maybe even a bigger win.
And for me, the reason that I want to grow it is because I have other ideas for things that I can do for people still within this niche, within this sphere, rather than because I want to earn more money. It's just because I'm excited about it and I have things where I'm like, oh, here's a thing I can do, here's a thing I can do. And as long as that excitement is still there, then I want to keep doing it, basically. And once the excitement goes, then it's time to give it to somebody else or stop doing it or whatever. But I hope that's not going to happen for a long time yet, because there's still quite a few things I want to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, I'm not saying that earning money is a bad thing in any way.
No, no.
But it is about what that, for me, and I think for most of my clients, and I think for you as well, it's about what that money can do for you in terms of improving the quality of your life, enabling you to maybe help other people, whatever is important to you, rather than the money per se.
And that's definitely true. I earn more money and I work fewer hours than I ever did before. And I'm happier because I didn't realize that I was stressed before. But looking back on it, I was stressed because of the amount of hours I was working and the amount, I wasn't stressed because of the money, but the money is a nice bonus on top of that.
Well, and it can cause a lot of stress.
Yeah,
not having enough. I mean, I can relate a lot to what you're saying, because I had this is when I was employed. One of the reasons why I went freelance was because I also triggered like an autoimmune disease through stress. It's not that uncommon.
No.
And I think, that is, again, that's a key motivator for lots of people.
And if you're watching, don't wait until you trigger the illness. Stop before you get there, please.
Totally. Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. So, okay, so we have kind of given advice, I think, along the way to teacher trainers who want to set up a more independent business. I think one thing we haven't specifically said, which is probably important, particularly in terms of teacher training, is I really think you've got to see whether you agree with this, but I think you've got to be really specific. I think just sort of saying, oh, I can help you improve your teaching doesn't really hit it. And B, it has to be something that people are willing to invest in, because people are often not willing to invest just in their own development because they feel it's a bit self-indulgent or whatever.
Yeah, well, they've got a certain amount of money to spend and they want to see the results. So I think that's the thing, is like so for me, I can, my course has got a clear result, which is pass the exam or pass the assignment. That's a relatively easy thing to sell. But if you're, I've got other teacher training ideas where it's like, okay, what problem can I help you to solve? And how much is that worth to me in terms of the amount of hours that I'm going to put in preparing that course or helping you to solve that problem? And how much is that worth to you in terms of how much you can afford to pay to come to me for that course, for that book, for that whatever it is, and of finding that balance between the two. But you've got to be really clear about what that problem is. So, I mean, another thing that I have sitting on my blog that I never promote particularly, but sitting on my blog, I have workshops and I have consultancy and I have observations. So you can book me for a workshop, you can book me for consultancy, you can book me for observations. One person's booked me for an observation in 2.5 years. 4 or 5 people have booked me for workshops, but often they're people who already knew me for other things and they've just used that to book me for a workshop anyway. But the workshops have been really general. A few people have booked me for consultancy, but most people who've booked me for consultancy have booked me for Delta consultancy, because that's what they now know me for because of the course.
Totally.
And so none of those things are doing anything. They're just sitting there. And okay, they make me a little bit of money each year, but there isn't a target, there isn't a focus, there isn't a niche there. And therefore, why would people book me? Like, why would they come to me unless they already know me for some other reason. And most of the time, what people know me for is my blog. And 80% of those people who know me for my blog say, Delta on your blog. Delta is how I found out about you. And so accidentally, that's become my niche. Like, it became my niche because when I was doing Delta, I couldn't find anything about it. So I thought I should write about this. And then I thought, oh, this is useful. What else can I tell people about it? And then I thought, oh, this is useful. Now I can put together a course. And so it's evolved over time as well. Like, you don't have to know straight away what your niche is, but start noticing the questions that people are asking you. Start noticing, when are people coming to you? What are they coming to you for? Okay, maybe that's a thing that you can turn into a course or a product or whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah, great advice. Excellent advice on niche there. So, okay, so we need to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but if anybody does have any questions, we might just be able to squeeze them in. And in the meantime, Sandy, what plans do you have going forward? I mean, I know you've got all these big plans that you're carefully prioritizing, but in the short term.
Well, so right now I'm recruiting for March to December courses for Module 1 and Module 3. I've got a website that's in development, so that Take Your Time Delta is going to have its own website instead of a crazy packed page on my blog. And I am paying somebody to develop that and paying a copywriter for that. So I'm starting to invest some money into developing the business. I've also been doing Joe Gakonga's video course, so I'm hoping to start having some videos with Delta tips, and also video content for the course as well. And then somewhere down the line, probably not this year, probably next year, I want to add a kind of Module 2 taster course. So I can't run a whole Module 2 course because I'm not a certified centre, but I want to do a little kind of single taster thing where people can have an observed lesson, do a little mini professional development assignment, and find out where they're at with Module 2, what kind of things they might need to work on to prepare for Module 2, because it's such a big investment of money. And just, again, trying to take a little bit of the stress out of Module 2 so that people know what to expect from it. So they can do a small course with me and go, okay, I'm absolutely not ready for this yet. Let's wait until I invest that money. Or I am ready, let's do it, go. And I think that's what I want to keep doing is kind of, how can I take the sting out of Delta? How can I take the stress out of Delta for people?
No, that sounds brilliant. Well, thank you. And if you are a teacher trainer watching this, thinking about developing your own business, obviously my group program, Designed to Flourish, is what I'm going to mention. You can come and work with me and Sandy and Jennifer Murray, who's a copywriting expert and ELT person. So we've got all the expertise you need there. Just check my profile for details on that, and have a look at Sandy's for details on her Take Your Time Delta programs. So thank you very much for everybody who came live, and thanks very much, Sandy, again.
Thank you for inviting me, Rachel. It's been really interesting. Thank you. And I would recommend Rachel's course as well. I'm finding it really useful because I'm doing it now.
Brilliant. Thanks very much then, everyone.